In a time of rising unrest, when borders dominate headlines and immigration policy shapes the future of our nation, the truth matters. From the front lines of law enforcement, national security, and public policy, this is Frontline Facts, where rhetoric is stripped away, where politics takes a back seat, and where facts, hard, documented facts, lead the conversation. As instability grows beyond our southern border, as communities feel the impact at home, we bring you informed voices. Attorneys, senior law enforcement leaders, policy experts, and professionals who understand the law, the protocols, and the consequences. This isn't opinion. This isn't spin. This is clarity in a time of confusion. This is Frontline Facts, and the conversation starts now.
Welcome to Frontline Facts with Luisa Deason. We are correcting the rhetoric on immigration issues and public policy. In today's episode, we will dive into what has happened in the past 10 years with the cartels and why they're in so much power today. We will include the threats that face both Mexico and the United States in the next hour. Please help me welcome our guest, Arturo Fontes. He's a former expert with the FBI and has worked to combat cartels in Mexico for over a decade or two. Art, welcome to the show. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. And thank you for having me, Luisa. It's a pleasure.
Well, let me ask you a couple of things so we can kind of lay out what your background is and what makes you such an expert. Because you come highly recommended, and of course, we run in the same circles.
Sure. Okay, I retired with the FBI in 2013. I had retired with 28 years of experience. When you work at the FBI, initially you work 6 months in every field, from counter narcotics to fugitives, counterintelligence, terrorism. And then at that time, when I came on board in '87, that was right after Kiki Camarena, the D agent, was killed. And they were hiring 1,000 agents at the time that I applied. But before that, they had a hiring freeze, and they were only hiring like a handful of 300 agents. So I had the opportunity, and my focus was really kind of narcotics. I really, enjoyed that. And I worked, the unique experience with me is that I had worked two border areas, which is San Diego and Laredo. And I did 2 tours in Guadalajara. So I was considered as a narc. I worked right there in the front lines on the border, and also doing 2 tours in Mexico. From the killing of the Catholic Cardinal Posadas, to the killing of the political candidate Colosio in Tijuana, to working at least 50, 60 kidnappings in Laredo of American citizens, where the Zetas the Gulf Cartel transformed to the Zetas, to the CDN, and working the Cartel de Jalisco when it was the Millennium Cartel, to the Sinaloa Cartel, and then the Cartel de Jalisco, and where we're at right now.
Well, now let me have you explain why this particular cartel de Nueva Generación de Jalisco is so dangerous and so violent. Were they a facet to the Zetas at some point, or what is their background?
That's a good question, Luisa. You know that when I was working, just to go back, when I was working in Tijuana, I thought Ramon Arellano Felix, who was extremely violent, and I thought that he was going to be, that took the cake as far as being the most violent and ruthless criminal. And then from traveling, or getting transferred from San Diego to Laredo, I just thought that was the worst time, because that was when the Cartel del Golfo, came on board. And I remember the first week working in Laredo, where there was a kidnapping of an American citizen on U.S. soil, and they couldn't find the guy that lost 200 pounds, and they ended up kidnapping his son that was 14 years old, and being able to rescue him. And then at that same couple of months working there, this was right after 9/11. I was in Laredo, and being able to see where a Mexican police officer in Nuevo Laredo comes to me and claims that these are locations in Nuevo Laredo where they have kidnapped victims and where the director, like the Surgeon General of Nuevo Laredo, is using let's say makeshift places where they're harvesting organs, and where they're kidnapping numerous people, including American citizens. And I just thought that at that time that was a big thing. Where kidnappings were happening, in Laredo, Texas, and they were bringing them into Mexico. And I was asking for help with our agency, but Laredo was being looked at as the armpit of Texas, where we were just not getting the resources, to work and to counter these drug trafficking. And then being able to work in that area with the cartels of the Zetas, and seeing how they worked, at least at that time, even though it was a pre-pan mixture of different politicians, we still had, even though we talk about Genaro Garcia Luna being the Secretary of Security, or talking to Aguila, who was the admiral on operations that helped get Betran Leyva, we actually had people that we could go to, police officers that we trusted. And as corrupt as the government was, we knew who was corrupt, and we knew who we could trust. We knew which police officers were what group, and we were able to use them one against the other. But
Yes.
nowadays, or should I stop, or do you want?
No, keep going.
And so, what nowadays, what you have is we cannot even contact someone, which I taught at the give an example is I taught at the embassy, and I still do it. I don't do it right now because things are frozen. But I remember working with numerous police officers, and I would call them. I said, Art, we have a kidnapping in this area. We have an incident. Can you help me? He says, Art, I cannot help you anymore, because if you need help, you may have to go to a politician in that area, because the cartels are so they're all over in every facet of not just business, but also in every form of I'll give you an example. Like right now, we had an incident where this guy's son, this guy's a businessman. His son was involved in an accident where he injured someone, and the las gruas, the tow truck, took the vehicle, to the lot, and the cartels are alerted first, where the businessman had to pay directly, to the cartel to resolve his problem. If not,
That is crazy. That
yeah,
is
yeah.
crazy,
So,
crazy.
yeah, they're in every facet of business that you could imagine. And so you asked me, is it worse now than it was before? I thought that the time that I was there, in Guadalajara, from 2010 to 13, right after Mentor was killed, I thought that was probably the worst time, but it really wasn't. I mean, because it's the time is right now, just because there is a lot of people are going to say, is it the cartel that is important, or is it the politicians? And now I still believe that the politicians in Mexico are pulling the strings. And I really believe that. And the question that you asked me was, in Jalisco, what's the situation right now in Jalisco? I don't know if you want me to talk about that later, because it's all transitioning from the time that, from Tijuana, to, the time I was in Laredo, 2004 to 2009. And then, what the situation is now is I believe that this is a culmination of so much violence, and I don't really think that the Mexican government has a handle on this. Uh, I think that Sheinbaum is between a rock and a hard spot, because she is facing her own scrutiny with her own government. Imagine this: she is the president of Mexico with a political party that has taken monies, billions of dollars, from the cartel, billions. I mean, I'm talking about the cartels, and just the smuggling end of it. It was a multi-billion-dollar industry on the fentanyl, and then on the drugs, and also on every facet of the informal economy. They're taking bribes, and that money goes direct. A lot of it goes to the politicians, and they're the
That's
ones.
pretty scary.
And
Now,
they're
let
the
me ask you
ones-
this, Art. For example, I know that trafficking, I worked for ICE. And so what we used to see was the moment that you get a big player and take them down, then the other organizations that are very well knit, these are criminal enterprises that are incredibly organized, that they start clamping down on different areas of the border. And as we would see, we'd start to see turf wars. And the same applies here for the cartels. You kill somebody who's a top notch cartel leader, and the force, what you then begin to see is, the chasing or the fighting for the territory. Have you and I remember the case. I remember the Kiki Camarena case, and I lived in Guadalajara, so I remember the shooting at the airport, and and I was born and raised in Mexico City. But when people call me today, the first thing they say is, "Can I travel to Mexico?" or "What should I do?" And I guide them over. I don't tell them to go or not. I just say, "Look, you need to check with the Department of State and heed the warnings that they're giving you, because there is a U.S. embassy in Mexico, but you need to be aware of your surroundings. Now is probably not the time to go to a resort." What is your take on what's happening that we hadn't seen before with cartels and resorts? And when they're looking for somebody, they're going to go into the resort and shoot somebody. They're not going to just go, "Well, I can't come in here because it's a tourist attraction."
Okay. One, yeah, there's like a couple of questions that you're giving me. One is when Nacho Coronel was killed by the military. That's when the Cartel de Jalisco was born, and then you had the La Resistencia, which was the Millennium Group that formed an alliance with La Resistencia, being backed by the Gulf and the Zetas. And you had wars where people were throwing on bridges, grenades being launched at restaurants, and it was very unstable. Beltran Leyva was killed by the military or by the Marina. You also in Toluca, I believe, or Cuernavaca, and then you had all hell broke loose at that time. Now you have Mayo Zambada gets extradited, but there was a lot of blame, and now the cartel was fractured, and 40 days later, all hell broke loose. You have now Cartel de Jalisco. Menchu gets neutralized by the military, and you have 5 segments: Juan Carlos Valencia, 03, Ricardo Ruiz, R, Arias Flores, El Jardinero, Gonzalo Mendoza, El Sapo, and Carlos Rivera, La Firma. Each one of those groups has its own army, throughout Jalisco and other areas. And the Jardinero, Arias Flores, and Gonzalo Mendoza, El Sapo, both are together, and they're at war, not at war, but they're done an agreement with 03, Juan Carlos Valencia, and Ricardo Ruiz. So I say that it's almost imminent that there's going to be this war that's going to start, any day, I believe, because it hasn't really calmed down. And I always use that example that once a lion is killed by another lion, other lions try to take the territory. In other words, if one lion kills the king, there's going to be other lions that are going to try to win that position. And I believe that's what's happening, and it's going to affect other areas like Baja California, like Nayarit, Zacatecas, and these other areas.
Well, in Puerto Vallarta, that's such a beautiful place anyway. But
also that's one of the big things for them. And I asked the source, do you think that the government is going to at least dialogue with them to maybe wait until after the World Cup? And I say that would be ideally, but there's no agreement, and I don't think anything's stopping them now. I don't think they really care if it happens.
I think you're right on that. So now, what are some of the major challenges you think law enforcement faces today in combating the cartel activity in Guadalajara?
U.S. or Mexican law enforcement?
Well, let's talk about the Mexico first, and then we'll discuss the dangers that it poses if that violence explodes and falls over to the U.S. side.
Okay. As you see, which is phenomenal to me, is that when you see Mencho was killed and they had his funeral, and it was almost like he was a state person that was killed, and they were honoring him, and even police were guiding traffic, and it was something very important. And so when the incident happened with Mencho when he was killed, there was a lot of reports that people were very upset that there was very few people on the streets, and it was coordinated with the police, state, local police, to stop the rioters and the blockades, because you rarely saw any of the police stopping anybody. And the political people saying that it was just beyond them and they just couldn't handle it. It was more because the police were in collusion with the cartel de Jalisco. Now, that question about law enforcement, even though I think they have 10,000 troops all around Mexico for security, doesn't make a damn difference because they still operate around them. I believe that the police, when these cartels start going after people, I think they're going to start hitting police and other people. Give you an example. When Mencho knocked down that helicopter, I think it was 2015. There was I talked to a high-ranking guy who was a source at that time, and he said there was a dispute between the Queenies and Mencho because Mencho, as a revolt, as revenge, on one day he wanted to kill 300 police officers. 300 police officers
That's alarming.
in one day. In one day. And there was disagreements between him and the Queenies, Abigail, and it was because Mencho was very violent and Queenie wanted to calm things down. He didn't want to stir things up. And thank God none of these police officers were killed. He's, at this time when he was living, I was very surprised that they got him, and he was just so powerful, and it was the paradigm shift on how they were able to neutralize him, and that's why you had this big empty spot right now that I think is going to take off.
Well, now, can you describe some of the situation? I know that at some point the El Paso airport was shut down for about 45 days. Then there was obviously what we saw in the news, and I don't always believe everything that's on the news because I do have some degree of knowledge of what's going on immigration wise, but to say that they had drones, the cartels were flying drones over to the U.S. side, I mean, that's not only alarming for the U.S. people, but I mean, we certainly don't want that kind of violence spilling over into the United States. I mean, we already have a problem with the drugs and the fentanyl deaths and the cocaine coming in and everything else, but the cartels are violent people.
That's a good question. The drones, and there's always some incursions of cartels coming across because they're escaping the military. And we saw that a lot in Laredo, Nuevo Laredo. Laredo is a very unique border because there's no buffer zone. At least in El Paso, you have some limit. Even though you see the border, but once you hit Laredo, Laredo's right there, and it's on the Mexican side, and you actually hear the shootouts. And sometimes there's even some shootings that there's a spillover. Just like that incident where the American was killed, water skiing on the river.
Yes, I read about that.
And you have an excursion of some of the cartels being chased, and they come into the U.S. or Mexican military people, even coming across, what is it, 2,200 or 2,600 square miles or miles that our border has, compared to Guatemala, which is, it's like one quarter.
My immigration stances, for example, I know for a fact that for years the battle was, why was Mexico not closing their southern border? Why are they letting all these people through and then issuing them some sort of an employment card to transit and be able to work along? So we found that a lot of the terrorists, for example, were being housed and living in Mexico to acclimate, and by the time they come into the United States, they speak almost perfect Spanish, and that to me is really, it raises the hair on my arm. But tell me a little bit about maybe some of the experiences. What is the difference that we see in Texas as opposed to when you were doing most of your work in San Diego?
Well, that's a good question. San Diego is a big city and it has a lot of resources, along with El Paso and even McAllen. Laredo, you're right there in the front lines. I mean, when I worked there from 2004, just to give a little background, 2004 to 2009, you had two of the biggest drug traffickers in the world. You had Miguel Trevino Morales. To me, he was the most violent, most brutal drug trafficker, more so superseding Pablo Escobar.
Wow.
He also had threatened me. And you also had Edgar Valdez Villarreal, who was representing the Sinaloa cartel. And they both had families. I remember executing a search warrant at Trevino's house when we finally I first identified him, and I deported his sister. Then I started getting threats immediately, directly, from Cuarenta. The border of Laredo has no buffer zone. You're right there on the front lines. We had shootings where we actually uncovered grenades in vehicles. We had a grenade launched at a house. The kidnappings were so subtle in Nuevo Laredo, that you would have a business person, let's say an attorney, coming over on the U.S. side, knocking on someone's door and telling them, "Listen, Miguel wants to talk to you because he has some issues he wants to talk to you about." He said, "Well, I really don't want to go." He says, "Well, I think you need to go because Miguel is with your representatives of cartels are with your family right now, and if you just you don't want to come over right now, we're going to whack your whole family. So you just decide right now what you want to do." And then they come across and they brutally kill these people. And so,
Well, and they don't just brutally kill them. Art, let's talk about the heinousness of the crime. I mean, they're chopping people up, and I've seen pictures alongside of the border with two different bands, and one has the arms and the legs, and the other one has the heads and the torsos. These are criminal enterprises that are so incredibly violent that people are not fully aware on this side what happens.
you're totally right, Lisa. And I believe all this happened with the Zetas, that when they came on board, they hired a lot of caibiles, the special forces from Central America, from Guatemala, and the Sinaloa group hired Mara Salvatruchas, and so you got this powder keg of two very violent people, and it just seemed like I remember the time that one of the cartels, the Sinaloa cartel, gave me a video. This was one of the first videos that came out where they actually were torturing or killing people, live on video. But this video, they showed us some videos of these people getting killed. I think it was 2005, 2006, and then from that point on, it just spilled over. I mean, into you would see this as something very normal, heinous, where they would burn people alive, where they would put explosives on them, where they would take their skin while they were alive, of their whole face, and take their scalp and everything, like the Indians did back in the time. It was just horrible. And even agents at that time, even now, when you start seeing them, you talk to sources, people get that post-traumatic stress syndrome. I remember working these kidnappings where you would, after the kidnapping is over, and in many cases you would resolve them. In some cases, you would not hear them again. And you would come home and you would just feel depressed and you don't know what hit you.
Yeah, imagine.
And I think that with a lot of agents, like what you've uncovered when you found those illegal alien bodies that were found in the trailer, it just stays with you. They don't go away.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I still, I can't say that I have PTSD, but 9/11 affected me. But beyond that, that was one of the most impressionable cases that I had worked. And I worked that case with the special agent in charge here in Houston. And of course, Tom Homan had come down from D.C. And I remember him giving some sort of it was a congressional hearing on that. And, he talked about it. I still think today he cries talking about that case, because that case was impactful in the fact that it was the first deadliest case we'd ever seen with tractor trailers moving people. And we always knew that these perpetrators and these smugglers were always out for the money, it was never for the benefit of that human life. And inside that tractor trailer, 19 people died. Amongst them was a father and a son. The son was 5 years old and he died. They suffocated in the back of that sweltering tractor trailer. And the driver got 19 consecutive life terms. And I think he was killed in prison a couple of years after that. But I still can remember the pictures. I still remember things that maybe a song comes on and it's triggered, or maybe I see or smell a perfume or a cologne that's still I mean, it's amazing. But yeah, that stays with you for a very long time. Now, how do you guys at the FBI, how were you guys dealing with some of the things that you were seeing? What kind of support were you getting? I mean, you're looking at awful things. Listen, we're going to have to cut over to a commercial break real quick, because we do have sponsors we want to highlight. Thank you for waiting.
When the stakes are high, clarity matters. In today's fast-moving media environment, misinformation spreads fast, especially around immigration policy, national security, and public safety. That's where Deason Consulting Services steps in. Led by Luisa Deason, former investigative journalist, DHS and ICE subject matter expert, and certified neuro-linguistic programming practitioner, Deason Consulting equips leaders, candidates, law enforcement, and executives with clear posture, confident delivery, and fact-based messaging. From immigration policy education and media response strategy to crisis communication and executive message development, Deason Consulting helps you cut through the rhetoric and speak with authority. Whether you're preparing for a press conference, navigating a complex policy issue, or facing high-pressure media scrutiny, we prepare you to lead. Deason Consulting Services: strategic communication, informed leadership, measured response. Contact Deason Consulting today and be ready when it matters most. Call today 832-244-2488 or email Luisa at DeasonConsultingServices.com.
In a market as dynamic and data-driven as Houston, experience isn't optional, it's essential. I'm Rena Seidel, team lead at Wazell Properties with over 20 years of strategic real estate experience in the Houston market. I work with physicians, executives, investors, and international clients who expect precision, discretion, and results. Fluent in both English and Spanish, I navigate complex negotiations seamlessly, whether it's luxury, residential, relocation, or investment portfolios. My expertise in Houston investment landscape allows my clients to make confident, numbers-backed decisions in one of the strongest markets in the country. If you're looking for insight, not guesswork, call me directly at 832-274-8884. Rena Seidel, Strategic Real Estate Results.
Well, we are back. I am Luisa Deason. I am your host for Frontline Facts. We are correcting the rhetoric, and we're coming back to our guest today.
You were asking me about what the difference is of working on the border like Laredo and working like in a city like San Diego. As you know, Laredo's is a lot smaller, and at that time we only had like a handful of agents. Well, I remember when I first came on board in '87 in San Antonio, Laredo only had like 2-3 agents, and then when I got there the second time in 2004, we only had, let's say, about 15 agents, and we had some task force people that worked with us. But we were so busy, and we were averaging at least 2-3 kidnappings a week. And how do you handle that? Well, and every day was a scandal. Without a scandal, every day was a big event. You really didn't have that much time, whether it was working the drug case, or doing the surveillances, or seizing drugs. But it was a close-knit group, and we were right there on in Laredo, in a building that was on McPherson or Shiloh, excuse me, and it was, all the agencies were on the same building, and we would have get together with the U.S. Attorney's Office, with all the different agencies, and have beers together. And I remember what was so funny was I went to go take my my dog with my daughter, 7-year-old daughter at that time, and right across from us was a leader of the Texas syndicate that was working with the cartel, and they would see you, and you would say hello to them, and 2 weeks later you're on surveillance watching them, and that's what Laredo was about. Laredo, it's a small town, and you get to bump into everyone, and people know each other. It's un ranchito.
Wow. Well, and I'm sure that some of those things have left quite an impression, but I mean, I'm sure you could write a book with your stories. Tell me about how the policies that Trump has implemented have maybe either benefited or have been in a negative light to the situation that we see with the cartels today. Describe what your stance and what you see.
Okay. I actually worked with Trump, and I got to meet him several times. But if you ask me, I would say that there's no other president in the history that has done more to counter narcotics than Trump has. Now, I'm even going into the time that when Kiki Camarena was killed, and we closed the border, and we targeted the U.S. targeted a lot of the politicians to get to the root of it. But this is special because, he's, it's 2025, 2026, and what has he done? He's pressured Mexico to seal the border on the Mexican side. He's put military troops on the border. He's something I've never even thought was going to happen. He labeled the cartels as terrorists, which is huge. I mean, I always wanted to do it when the settlers were.
That was a very good thing on his behalf.
Yeah, he's operating. He also has raised taxes on Mexico, and Mexico right now is teetering, with the remittances, because a lot of the immigration of people that were sent back, a lot of bad people that were sent back to Mexico. And in addition to that, this is something interesting about immigration, is I have a very high level source, and he's telling me that there's many drug traffickers and really bad people that want to go back to Mexico or back to their home countries because they're afraid of being picked up by the U.S. Because if they get picked up by the U.S., they're going to get extradited back to Mexico or Central America, and they're going to face very severe consequences. And that's why they're even asking for people to smuggle them back to their home country.
Usually here they want to get smuggled back to Mexico or to some.
I live here because they don't want to get arrested, and they want to wait until Trump gets on, and then maybe they'll come back again. And that's common. Yeah, instead, I think Trump has done a lot, and it's changed the geopolitics throughout not just Mexico but other countries by just even that little incident that happened last week. Not incident, where Trump has a coalition of different countries, and Mexico and Brazil are not even part of it, and now Mexico's up in arms.
Well, and Mexico as a whole has always been such a beautiful place. I mean, Mexico City is one of the most metropolitan cities you can live in and visit, museums, everything. But when you have cartel activity to the level at which we're seeing today, it's dangerous. And, tourists get comfortable in their own skin and they say, I can go down and travel and I can do all these things. And it's like, really, you need to be able to heed the warnings that the Department of State gives you. But beyond that, you need to have your head on a swivel. They don't care whether you're a tourist or not. And I'll give you an example. We have friends that still live in Mexico, in Guadalajara, and they were calling us and letting us know that they had to hunker down and be in, they had to be in their homes, hunker down by 2:00 the day the shooting started. And it's scary when they're announcing that anybody that would be out on the streets would be shot and killed, especially the targets that they have against U.S. citizens now. It's almost like you're walking around with a target on your back. What is your perspective or your stance on that? How do you see that?
I think it's a little bit different. My perspective is different than what you're saying. I understand that things are volatile right now. I think the threat of any tourist or any American that's across Mexico is being cases of mistaken identity or at the wrong place at the wrong time. Cartels normally do not target Americans, and especially now, the cartels know that. It's almost like they realize that Trump is just looking for an excuse to come in to Mexico, and they're being extra careful where they don't want to pick up an American or where an American could be a victim, because they're actually nervous right now because they don't know which way Trump is thinking. In other words, if there's an incident of a diplomat in Mexico, that is U.S. diplomat that is killed, they're afraid that Trump will just say, the hell with it, we're going into Mexico and we're going to take care of business because Shine Bob can't take care of business. That's what they don't want.
Well, and that goes back to why we started this podcast, to hear from experts like yourself to correct the rhetoric. The media fear mongers, and I know with most of the immigration coverage that they provide, they don't really cover the truth all the time. And knowing the statutes and knowing what direction we're going in, it's always nice to be kind of a sounding board. Although I'm not a lawyer, I usually can correct people and say, I don't think that that's a credible source. You need to go to other sources, of course, But give me an example of something that has stuck with you, maybe a case or two that really impacted you and that you've thought over and over again and really just kind of changed the way you see things in life.
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of things, but really, this happened to me May 16th, 2025. This is after I retired, and it happened because I was teaching classes for last year and a year before that on narcomenudeo, on counter narcotics, to several police officers. And I befriended two very close friends now, Pablo Cajigal and Carlos Orozco. These were two instructors at the INL in Mexico City, and I invited them because they didn't have any work, and I introduced them to Cesar Guzman in Guadalajara, and they taught a class in Jalisco on May 16th last year, and they taught a class on intelligence. After the class, and during that week, I was talking to them, and I was supposed to go teach the class with these people, at least show my presence. Unfortunately, on Friday night, the cartel de Jalisco executed Cesar Guzman and Carlos and Pablo. They shot him 9 times, and he's still living. And that Friday night, when I got the call that they were killed, initially I got the call that all three of them were killed. It was just so freaking surreal that my best friend, one of my best friends that I've known for 20 something years, and he was a friend of the embassy, has done so many good things, to save people, to work with people, get killed along two other people, one other person that had nothing to do with Jalisco. They just happened to teach the class. It just hit home. And when you work kind of narcotics and you work in Mexico, I had dozens and dozens of people that were killed in Tijuana and Nuevo Laredo, and Mexico City. But this was something that happened recently. I think that hit home. And also, talking to families of kidnapped victims, American families, and them not able to see their loved ones because they're still gone and they don't know if they're alive or not. I think that is the worst crime. And when you deal with so much trauma every day of these people, it really hurts. But this last one that hurt this last year, because I'm still traveling to Mexico and I still help people, and these were good friends that two were killed, and this helped.
I'm sorry for your loss. That's a terrible, terrible tragedy. And the kidnappings in Mexico have been happening for a very long time, but with Mexican nationals. And they're held at ransom, and sometimes they're killed, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're raped, sometimes they're women, just all kinds of horrible, horrible things. Now, let me pivot a little bit towards what you do now and how are you using your expertise in the field that you're now in?
Yes, I've been retired since 2013, and and we were talking about immigration. I remember being contracted by a third party company, and they wanted to ascertain on when Trump took office in 2016. That's when the caravans started coming in of immigration, people coming in, and they were coming in from Honduras, Guatemala, and then there was caravans of thousands of people coming across to the different borders. And our investigation was, well, who's funding these people? And it's been a while now, but remember we found that we discovered that organizations in Central America were being funded by Venezuela and other countries like China, and these countries were funding these organizations because by bringing in all these people in such a vulnerable time when Trump first took office, these countries want to do as many things to disrupt our country, to weaken our country by sending an inordinate amount of immigration people, of immigrants into the U.S. And many of them, like Trump said, were not really good people. And some of these people are now Iranian plants that are in this country, and from other countries that are really really concerning.
I agree with you.
And
I
so,
remember seeing things like we've never seen anything like it. 20,000 a day coming through the southern border is just unbelievable numbers. I mean, a bad day was 800 in a week back when I was with INS and with ICE. But the staggering numbers and the staggering identities, because these people came from countries that were either supported by terrorism or terrorist countries, not friendly to the United States. And when you start talking about the amount of, Islamic radicals that entered, that were smuggled in, and now we have a problem with it's almost as if we learned nothing out of the 9/11 attacks. People back then were too concerned about hurting people's feelings and profiling and doing all of that. Although the profiling is illegal, you do have to follow patterns of behavior and things that match. But the numbers, I mean, I sat horrified on watching news and television, just wondering how in that world are we going to get all these people? So we're very blessed that we have Trump in office. But that's all tied to what you have been doing. We used to get stowaways. We used to get all kinds of crazy, crazy things. But the caravans are something that we had never really been exposed to until the Biden administration. At that amount of people coming in caravans.
That's correct. And it normally happens right before a president is going to take office, or it happens when somebody is leaving, and it happens to disrupt our democracy. And at that time, what's going on right now is what the Western Hemisphere, what Trump's trying to do is just phenomenal. And I saw it before. And my biggest complaint with our government is that our government, when I was in all those years, we never really focused on Central, South America, including Mexico. We always looked at the Middle East and the Far East, and we're looking at other countries, but we don't put enough attention to what's in our neighborhood, and we don't do it. And I think now, with Marco Rubio being our secretary, he has focused on it, and I think we're better now because China was kicking our butt. You go to Mexico City, you go to any place like that, you go to Colombia, and you see all these Chinese cars, and you see you have so much influence with the Chinese. And I worked in Manzanillo because that was my area. I remember a lot of Chinese influence right there. It was Chinese companies right there in Manzanillo, where the Chinese were bringing in the methamphetamine or the precursor chemicals, and then what went back was the iron ore, that went back to China, and China had so much influence, but they did it subtly, and now they were in almost every Latin American country, building bridges and just choking those governments out until they had a piece of the ports, and they had so much influence, like in Panama and other Central American countries. But Trump is now changing all this in a very good way. The U.S. is coming back, and I think it's very important to take care of our hometown, of our areas.
And it goes back to the importance of, we've always said it's usually the drugs and the people that comes north, and then it's the guns and the money that goes south.
Oh.
But I think that you and I probably experienced, I was never an agent, but I can't imagine some of the things you must have lived through and seen. But you know what? I just have so much respect for you, Art, for what you've done and for making a difference. And I think, this is where we're trying to make a difference with my podcast, is we're trying to highlight what the truth is instead of all this rhetoric that does not fit the agenda of the left, and we're just so sick of the lies and the fear mongering. And I can't tell you how many times I'm called the racist, and I'm like, I'm not a racist. I'm a Mexican national. I've naturalized. I'm a U.S. citizen, but people just don't get it. They don't understand deep down the dangers of how the cartels are involved in everything, how human smuggling and trafficking are all intertwined, whether it's Mexican cartels or whether it's other horrible organizations in Russia or China or in the Muslim countries. People don't get it. So to the average American, what are some of we got about 10 minutes left. What are some of maybe a message or two that you can say, hey, wake up. This is really what's happening. We're not lying to you. What can you add to this podcast for them?
Well, just a relevant thing is you mentioned about, just tourism. A lot of people that want to go to these places. I believe that, that Americans are not targets, but because the situation is very volatile, there are certain areas that I think, you should not travel. Definitely, Jalisco is one of them. The Bajío area, which is Aguascaliente, the state, Guanajuato, Nayarit. Those are strongholds. So if this thing takes off, when I say take off, I mean when these groups decide that they're gonna hit it, it's gonna affect, the highways. It's gonna affect security. And I just put something on my LinkedIn post where, we always want to be safe, and a lot of these rich businessmen want to drive a nice Cadillac or a Suburban armored level 5, in Mexico. And I don't agree driving in these big vehicles. I think a vehicle that's low profile, like a T1 or something less. You could have an armored car guy, a guy that's armed in the vehicle. That's fine. But by driving a car like that, all you're not only raising suspicion with the cartels, you're also raising suspicions with the local, state, federal police, and you're going to get pulled over.
Yes.
And you're just raising a suspicion. So like you may be in that armored car, but wherever you're going to go, they'll know where you're at. And that just raises suspicion. So I recommend going in a vehicle that's from let's say it's Jalisco. We'll drive in a Jalisco vehicle. Don't drive in a vehicle that's from Tamaulipas, where the war's going on. That's one thing. And as far as waking up, I believe that the price of fentanyl they say has gone down a little bit, but some of the drugs is still coming in, and the cartels are now they change. We always use that saying like the water balloon. If you press the water balloon one way, it's going to go out the other way. And the cartels, they always look at opportunities, and normally they don't lose money, but the territory is smaller for them because there's so much scrutiny on them, and they could do very desperate things to do it. Something that people that were asking me about the Guthrie case in Arizona, just changing the subject. I just thought it was relevant just because what happened with Guthrie. I don't have all the details of what's going on, but I just looking at the videos and everything. I believe that they should not discount Mexico, because if you look at Tucson, it's almost, what is it? It's 50 something percent Latinos.
Yes.
Number two, the border is 72 miles. I've worked 60, 70 kidnappings, and I know that every kidnapping that I've worked, not one of them is more. There's usually more than one person, and I believe it wasn't just that one individual. And practicality, by moving Miss Guthrie, it takes you have one person driving the car and you have one person holding her. It's I don't see the logistics unless she's even was dead. Why would they take the body? Some people say it was because it was a home invasion and they may have killed her inside, and they wanted to take the body. I don't believe that. I think they would have just left the body there.
Yeah.
I think they thought there was a good opportunity that she was lived alone. She probably had jewelry, and she has very good items there. We don't know that the people that came in there actually stole items. That's being kept very secret. So I think that there's a good chance, because if you work on the border, if you're going south, I don't know if there was any checkpoints that would stop them. They normally have people, but I don't know at that time, if there's any videos that show what type of vehicle going southbound.
Right.
And I know they're checking it now, but I think we should not discount that. And also, the last thing is that the individual that came to the house, he was very calm, even though he took those, the foliage, the plants, and put it on the plant. The guy seemed very calm, and some people say he could have been a gardener, because why would he grab the dirt and those items? And it's normally on every kidnapping, there's always someone on the inside that gives them the heads up, whether it was a maid that inadvertently told someone about her living by herself, and that was just my perspective on that.
Well, and that's usually what happens in Mexico. It's somebody that does cleaning at the house, or somebody who's the gardener or something like that when you get robbed.
Yeah.
Well, Art, we're coming close to the end of our podcast, but I want to eventually invite you back, because you've given us such great insight to what's happening. I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know that you travel. I know that you're, obviously a very busy individual and in high demand, but I want to thank you for the time you've spent with us and informing and educating our public and correcting the rhetoric. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to the conclusion. Until our next episode, we welcome you to Frontline Facts with Luisa Deason, and until next time.
Thank you, Luisa. Appreciate it. Goodbye.